Once Alexander was sure that she was a reasonable distance down the hall, and safely away from any domestic outbursts, he looked back down at his newspaper and said, "My answer is no." Eleanor let out an exasperated screech and stamped her foot. "You could at least look at the brochure," she snapped, snatching the newspaper from her father's fingertips. Alexander was forced to look up at his daughter. Eleanor had always been a challenging child. She was anything but a typical princess. She would take fiery political arguments and sneaking out to loud, rowdy concerts over mild, polite conversation any day, and more than anything, she despised elaborate formal functions, or at least she assumed she did, having refused to ever attend one. But she was smart, she was confident, and she was passionate. And for Alexander, that was all far more important than any of the traditional values expected of her. Although occasionally he did wish she'd watch her language around her grandparents. As much as he wanted Eleanor to be happy and live a life free of the commitments of royalty, the fact remains that she would be queen one day and would eventually need to accept that responsibility. He was determined to find a way to make his daughter realise she could enjoy her royal obligations, something he'd had to learn himself when he was younger. "You are going to Aston Court, as have all the rulers of Maradova for the last 100 years, and you're going to like it, whether you like it or not." Matilda chuckled softly across the table as she sipped her tea. "No," Eleanor echoed her father's stern tone. "I'm going to Rosewood Hall in England." Eleanor's voice didn't waver. She was determined. She would be kicking and screaming long before she was caught entering the gates of Aston Court. Alexander sighed deeply. For Eleanor, attending Aston Court wasn't about simply not getting her way, as it would be for most teenagers. It would be the end of her freedom as an undeclared royal altogether. She would officially have to come out to the public as the heir to the Maravish throne. She would no longer be able to sneak out or refuse to attend royal functions, and she'd have to stop dyeing her hair and start dressing more appropriately. Her responsibilities would begin, and she could never lead any semblance of a normal life again. Alexander picked up his newspaper and folded it neatly. He prepared himself for the ensuing heated shouting match, a regular occurrence since Eleanor had hit her teenage years. "Please, Dad." This caught Alexander completely off guard. So rarely did his daughter plead. She was far too stubborn. He looked up, expecting to see her usual indomitable pout, but instead was confronted with a look of real desperation. He found himself struggling to remember why he was so determined to say no, before quickly reminding himself that Aston Court was the only school that could guarantee her safety once she was officially announced to the public as their princess. There she would be under expert surveillance. She'd be safe, and she'd be perfectly prepared for her future. It was Aston Court or nothing, yet for all his certainty, he found himself gingerly reaching out his hand as Eleanor placed the rosewood brochure in his palm. She wrapped her hands around his and squeezed lightly. "All you have to do is read it. That's all I ask." Across the table, Queen Matilda took another discreet sip of her tea before delicately placing the cup on her saucer. "You know, it may be the tea talking, but I've always been fond of England. Haven't you, Alexander?" She looked up at her husband, her carefree expression dropping momentarily as her eyes locked with his. The Maravish king held his wife's gaze for what felt like the longest few seconds of his life. She had that effect on him. He let out a long sigh before finally giving up. "Fine, I will read the brochure, but that's it." Eleanor